I? Okay, I think I'm live. Okay. Now, I don't know if anybody's going to join me right away, but I'm going to read a bit from The Tao of Fully Feeling by Pete Walker on forgiveness and why forgiveness does not really serve people who've been through trauma, who have not processed it. And the idea that society tells people that forgiveness is the only way forward, and no matter how much you've been abused in your life, particularly by carers or parents, that you have to forgive them. And this puts us in a bit of a dilemma that we end up basically suffering guilt and shame, thinking that there's something wrong with us because we can't do what everybody is suggesting that we do. So I think I can see my live chat. And if anybody's there, they're welcome to say hello or basically say hello or ask any questions as I read. So the point is that with childhood trauma, we grow up, we haven't processed it, we're in a lot of pain, we're having flashbacks, nightmares, and it's affecting our lives. And for many, go to the doctors and are being given anxiety pills, which I won't knock, but it seems that the real issues are not being dealt with because we're told that forgiveness is the key to healing, which is not the absolute truth. And until we've begun to process it and had healthy anger and healthy anger and healthy blame, and we're no longer in denial, then we can start healing. And as we grow and develop on the healing process, and we're doing it consciously, then forgiveness does not become an issue, meaning that as we process, forgiveness is not an issue. There is nothing to forgive. We find that we're not left with the dilemma that we think that we have to forgive anybody for anything. If people have been abused, just because somebody's your parent doesn't mean that forgiveness is the answer, but spirituality and friends, you'll hear it from them, why don't you forgive them? They're your parents, and this is not helpful, or your carers or your family members. And it's not helpful for people who have CPTSD or PTSD. And if you don't know what the difference is between PTSD and complex PTSD, the basic difference is that PTSD is generally a one-off event. I'm not saying it's one-off, but it's generally a one-off event, whereas complex PTSD, it's years and years and years of trauma through childhood, which can give a child developmental arrest, which means that the normal healthy emotions do not develop. And for instance, if you keep telling a child every time they go to be nurtured or they need something, you tell them to shut up, go away, what's wrong with you, child, then that child is going to stop, that part of that child is going to stop growing and developing because they're going to stop going to the parent for help and support. And then as adults, we end up doing the same. We end up in relationships or in jobs where people are being abusive and we haven't got the ability to stand up for ourselves. We'll go into a corner, so to speak. We'll sort of stay away from people. And the other thing is that, so it affects our entire lives. So when people say forgive whoever abused you because they're your parents, it is not okay, and we don't have to take that on board. And it's a very religious belief as well. It goes back 2,000 years of religious indoctrination, which will tell people that they basically forgive thy mother and father. But what they don't add is that if your mother and father honor you, then fair enough. But if they've been abusing you, then forgiveness is not really the answer to healing your complex PTSD or other issues. So I'm going to read, and if anybody wants to ask any questions, or if you don't want to ask me here, I'm over on Facebook as well. But also, if you find this useful for anybody, I'd like you to share it out and also hit the notification button, because I'm going to be reading a bit of this book this week. This book is The Tao of Fully Feeling, and it's Pete Walker, and his other book is called Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving, But this book, I'm going to read a bit of chapter 2 and see how I go. So let's start. So forgiveness as denial. This is where it goes. So I'm going to start here. So he says forgiveness as denial. So forgive me while I'm reading. I'll be looking at the book, but I'll be checking in to see if there's any messages as I go. So he says here that many of us are pressured to choose a premature and empty form of forgiveness with guilt-inducing statements like, when are you going to stop crying about your childhood? Don't you think it's time you let your parents off the hook? Why don't you let the past be the past and just get on with the business of living? Do you know what your problem is? You're just not very forgiving. This kind of toxic goading is often hard to resist. The concept of forgiveness is frequently held out as a miraculous tool of recovery. I hope you're there with me. Forgiveness is often prescribed as the answer to all of our problems, especially those around love and intimacy. If we would only decide to forgive, if only we would choose forgiveness, then we would be freed from the pain of loneliness and separation. Then he says, survivors are particularly susceptible to the injurious advice when they first begin to feel their healthy anger about the past. Instead of experiencing their anger as validation of how poorly they were parented, they often short-circuit their recovery by turning it mercilessly against themselves. And this is what I've said to myself, and I'm sure many out there who've been through abuse. What's wrong with me? Why can't I forgive? If there wasn't something really wrong with me, I would have forgiven my parents by now. I am really bad. No wonder nobody loves me. No wonder my life's such a mess. I've decided to forgive. I think I will forgive. My intention is to choose forgiveness, but still I am lonely. I guess I'll never do anything right, and I can't even forgive. So when we're made wrong because we can't forgive abuse that went on for years as children, it means that we then are on this huge guilt trip, and then we go into toxic shame. So we can see that thinking that forgiveness is the key, we're not going to heal, because the only way to heal or begin to heal the wounding, and it's not all or nothing, is to get to a place where we are able to healthy anger and healthy blame. So a lot of people would say, particularly in spiritual circles and social media and Facebook and such, that you have to forgive, that you can't blame your parents because they're your parents, regardless of what they've done to you, and your carers, because it isn't always parents that people have suffered their abuse from. And then we go deeper into the toxic shame and guilting, and then we will dissociate. And a lot of people dissociate sometimes through alcohol, sometimes through drugs, for instance. I went on alcohol for about, I got to a bottle and a half of wine a night, drowning my guilt out and running a successful business. And it was only when I had a breakdown in 2016, which was a breakdown because there were a lot of losses in my life. I had a flashback regression that was so bad that it literally wiped me out. I lost 20 pounds in weight, and I couldn't afford to lose weight because I'm very small anyway. My hair began to fall out and I could not function. So that was the result of going into a flashback memory that was so horrifying to my physical being that I couldn't function. So the good news about that was that I then began to psychoeducate myself, and I found Pete Walker's book. I'd been watching YouTubes. I found Pete Walker's book. It's called Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving, and that book will be below. And it's also free on Audible USA at the moment, and I think on Amazon.co.uk it's maybe free on Kindle. So you'll be able to check that out when I leave the links below. But I would say that for a lot of people, we need to get this out of our head that forgiveness is the healing balm. Clearly, when we feel at peace with something, what we find is that there's nothing to forgive. So the confusion is that forcing ourselves into a fake forgiveness or goading ourselves that we have to before we've grieved and angered, healthy anger, and before we blamed, because, you know, I don't know, it's the path. So it's a path to follow. I'm going to read a bit more. And I see I've got 3 viewers. If anybody wants to, you know, say hello, or you know what I'm talking about, because some people don't know. If, you know, when I put videos out that maybe say anxiety or fear, then people know what that is. But there are many that are not aware of what CPTSD is. And that, what it is a response. It's not a disorder. It is a response to events of years of abuse as a child, over a period of time, over a long period of time, often for many. And the other thing that's fascinating, which people don't know, is that not everybody knows this, but Pete Walker points this out, that 1 in 3 girls are sexually abused or violated, or violations generally in childhood, and 1 in 5 boys. So if we say we got 7.5 billion people on planet Earth, that's a huge number of people that are walking around, you know, with toxic shame, feeling that they're not able to speak up and be, you know, talk about their pain. And the problem that the minute we do begin to have the courage to speak up and talk about the pain we're in order to heal it and verbally ventilate, because we've been shut down as children, as adults, we then have friends who've not been through abuse telling us, you know, you have to forgive. And it's so not simple. So it seems that half of the population need to be educated. Also, the people that have not experienced abuse, that not all parents or family members or people have loving families. So I'll continue reading a bit more. Chapter 2 here. So he says, when we choose forgiveness by swallowing our anger about parental injustice, we slip into a psychic fog of denial. Denial is a broad term used by recovery therapists to describe the various defenses we use to numb ourselves to ongoing, unchangeable hurtfulness. I'm using the term denial here somewhat differently than it would be used in the drug and alcohol recovery movement. There, denial often implies a shameful, blameworthy conscious process used by substance abusers to ignore the blatantly destructive effects of their addiction. Denial is a psychic survival mechanism that arises unconsciously and automatically in continuously abused and neglected children. Children need to idealize at least one parent to maintain their enthusiasm for life. Denial allows them to maintain the illusion of being loved, regardless of how untrue that is. So great is this need that they automatically banish from their awareness all manner of parental disregard, injustice, and hostility, especially in the idolized parent. Denial protects abused children from the overwhelming, undigestible reality that their parents are not their allies. This is why great expert Stephen Levine poses the following question, which I'm going to read. So Stephen Levine says, how often we are like the battered child on the front page of the Los Angeles Times, being carried gently from the room by the compassionate matron who reaches out over the matron's shoulder, shouting, "Mama, Mama," to the woman in custody between the policeman on the other side of the room, arrested for the burning the flesh and the bones of that child. Many of us relied on denial to save our sanity and sometimes our lives in childhood. We were too fragile and dependent to feel the overwhelming pain and disappointment we experienced at the hands of our parents. For many of us, gross unfairness was daily and ongoing, endless and impossible to challenge or change, with no foreseeable relief and no one to whom we could appeal for protection. What choice did we have but to go numb? So when children numb out, it goes into adulthood, and then we carry it over into our adult life and adult relationships. So I think I've got 2 people watching. If anybody wants to say hello, you can. And I'm going to continue reading this book. I think I'm going to read another page of this and, you know, continue with this chapter tomorrow as well. It's important people hear this. So if you do know anybody who needs this and has had child abuse and they're struggling with themselves, pass it on. Okay, so many of us relied on denial to save our sanity. I've read that bit. So they have, but next bit, it says, denial is truly a matter of life and death for some children. Those who cannot numb themselves and discount their perceptions of proactive parental viciousness are susceptible to mental illness, early drug abuse, and suicide. Some are prone to fatal accidents, and some develop a death wish that destroys their ability to fight off illness. So let me stop there. When I stopped drinking in 2012 and I stopped pushing down my pain, what was fascinating was that then when I stopped drinking, I started getting allergies and I couldn't breathe through my nose all of a sudden. This was 3 months after I stopped drinking in 2012. So what had happened was, in those 3 months after stopping drinking, during those 3 months, I started having flashbacks, nightmares, and terror dreams. And I started getting a lot of anxiety and panic attacks. And I really did not know what was going on. I'd go to the doctor and say, there's something wrong. I think I'm going to die. But that is what CPTSD is. You start recalling those memories, and then your body is reacting to the mind. And in that, your cortisol levels, like the mechanics of the body, it meant that my adrenals were being flushed with cortisol. And cortisol basically is when we get stressed out and anxious about something, and that depletes the immune system. So it's not something to be scared of, because we can heal the body, but we need to be aware that the fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, which Pete Walker refers to as the 4 Fs. Fight is when we are in a position and we want to fight. If somebody triggers us, we'll want to fight. Flight is when we get extremely busy and we, want to ignore what we're thinking. And freeze is when we go into a freeze mode and we can't move from where we are. And fawn is where we then are extra nice to, somebody triggers us, but then we're extra nice to them instead of standing up for ourselves. So, there's a lot of knock-on effects, and the more psychoeducation that goes out there, then the more people will be able to choose, do I deal with this through taking anxiety pills? What other therapies are there? And how can I begin? And also, I will add, verbal ventilation was my biggest thing. I started getting public on social media, on Facebook, and not the graphics of my childhood, but I started talking up against, not against so much, but about spirituality, because I was in a lot of spiritual groups that were telling me that my pain, all I had to do, apparently to heal my trauma, was surrender and hand it over to God. And that's something else that's called spiritual bypassing. And even people that have not been through, sexual abuse or abuse do spiritual bypass their lives. Some people do. And I'm very aware that it's, it's very rife out there, and people do it because they're in pain. And they don't want to feel that pain, so they get into spiritual teachings. And spiritual teachings are a very beautiful thing. I'm not going to knock those either. They all have everything has its place in the world. But if we're just using one thing and thinking that spirituality is going to heal complex PTSD and that all we've got to do is forgive, it does not work. We have to know and understand what is actually going on in us. So now I'm going to continue the little bit more of this book. Next bit. So he says, survivors who are still in denial about the dysfunctionality of their families should not be blamed or shamed. The blinders of denial had to be used for many years. Many of us become habituated to them, and I know many survivors of savage abuse who honestly believe their parents took good care of them. How much harder then is it for those who only suffered emotional neglect to understand how seriously they were deprived? So what he's saying here is that some abuse is emotional neglect as well. So, don't think the other problem we've got, we think that when somebody, if a parent's disdainful and emotionally neglect us, we think, oh, well, it wasn't that bad. And if we're denying that, then again, we're going to deny it in our adult relationships. So when somebody, is really unkind to us or is not, meeting our needs, because relationships are about meeting each other's needs. It's not about, we want to move away from codependency, but we want to understand that it's okay to expect to have our basic needs met in relationship and to be treated with honor and with dignity. And, so there's a lot of re-establishing and learning out who we really are and what our personality is. So a bit more of this book. He says, denial is often even harder to dissolve than it is to recognize. We are understandably reluctant to look beyond our denial into the pain it masks because we were humiliated for revealing our hurt in childhood. How can we believe that it is safe to express our painful feelings now when all around us in real life and on television we see others being ridiculed for emotional expressiveness? All too many of us have been wounded by variations of the threat, stop crying, or I'll give you something to cry about. The fact that many of us mimic this abusive statement as if it is an amusing cliche, authentiates, I think that says, the pervasiveness of our own denial. When we do not challenge denial, we remain numbly imprisoned in old pain, blindly indifferent to the wounds and losses of our childhood, mesmerized by the outmoded illusion that we had a happy childhood. We live our lives half-heartedly in an emotionally anesthetized condition. As distinguished childhood expert Bruno, I think it says Bettelheim, states, it says here, many childhood experiences have become of necessity deeply buried in the unconscious during the process of developing one's adult personality. This separation or distancing from one's childhood is no longer needed when the adult personality is fully and securely formed. But by then, the distancing has, for most people, become part of the very personality. Separation from one's childhood is temporary, necessary, but it is permanently maintained. If permanently maintained, it deprives us of our inner experiences, which when restored to us can keep us young in spirit and also permit greater closeness to our own children, if one has children. So I'm going to leave it there today. I hope anybody watching this, it's been useful. I think it's really important information. And if you liked what I've read, hit the notification button or subscribe, because I'm going to read some more of this tomorrow, along with other things that I've got planned. I also look at evolutionary astrology. There's a few things I do on my channel, but this is something close to my heart because I see so many people struggling with themselves. And I think that it's, it's beautiful knowledge to have. And I'm so proud of my own development over the years. That, I was given such a hard start in life. I had children's homes and lots of other things. And the thing is, with childhood trauma, anybody looking at us as human beings, they don't see the wounds. They don't see, that there's this deep, these deep issues going on. And I think that this is part of my life now, also helping other people, get to understand themselves and help themselves through my own wisdom and experience. And that's it for today. So I hope that's really useful to you. I'm going to end my live stream and I'll be back tomorrow with a bit more, hopefully around 10 o'clock. I'm in the UK, so 10 o'clock my time, but I'll put out the what time you'll see it up and running when it runs, when it's there. That's it. Thank you for watching. Thank you.